What's up, airplane collectors? Welcome to a model airplane review. I'm your host, Ray. Today I'll be reviewing the NG model 1-400 scale Southwest Airlines Boeing 737 MAX 8 in the Pink 1 special livery. In this video, I'll do an in-depth review of the model, and at the end I will give my opinion on the model and whether or not I recommend it to other collectors. This model classifies as a fantasy model, meaning that this aircraft does not exist in real life. This model is actually based off of an April Fool's joke posted to Instagram in April of 2023. The user that posted this goes by the name of DreamlinerFan2016, and this post consisted of a single image of a real Southwest Airlines Boeing 737 MAX 8, but it was photoshopped to have an all-pink livery instead of the standard all-blue livery that Southwest planes normally are painted in. My guess is that NG model caught wind of this and thought it was pretty cool, and they decided to make a model out of it shortly afterwards. And here it is. The box is made out of cardstock. It measures 12.7 centimeters long, 3.5 centimeters wide, or 3.5, and another 12.7 centimeters tall. I'll show you around the box now. This is the front. Here's the bottom. The right side. Top. Left side, and the back side. Included in the box is the model, fully assembled, painted, and ready to display, as well as a yellow NG model collector rewards program card. Let's do a quick 360 of the model before I begin my review. The fuselage length is 9.6 centimeters, the wingspan is 8.9 centimeters, and it stands 3.2 centimeters tall. These dimensions should be accurate to 1-400 scale. This model is made mostly out of die-cast metal. We'll be looking at the fuselage first. The nose profile on the model looks decent. Something about it does seem a little bit odd. I do believe that the nose here might be a little bit too pointy. This is not typical from NG. Usually NG does a great job on their 1-400 scale 737 noses across all of their molds, but this one seems a little bit off. Not by much, though. There's lots of detail on the fuselage. I can't really comment on paint application other than it's consistent, because this is a fictional livery and there is no real aircraft to base this off of, so I'm going to say the color's good because, well, it's a nice and bright pink, but that's all I can really say. But for the paint application itself, it's good. Printed detail is definitely not lacking either. There's lots of detail to go around. We'll move down the fuselage. The creases in the fuselage look good and accurate as well. Looks pretty nice. And here is the rear of the aircraft. The vertical stabilizer looks pretty nice. The shape is good. There is molded detail in the form of recessed panel line detail for the rudder. It's hard to see, but it's there. It's not really filled in with paint, which is good to see. Paint and printed detail application looks pretty good here as well. I will now move the model so we can see the right side of the aircraft. Everything I've said about the left side can also be applied to the right side. We're off to a pretty solid start. The only issues I've noticed so far is a slightly odd nose shape. Moving on to the wings. The wings in this model are also very nicely detailed. There is a lot of recessed panel line details for the control surfaces, all of which are clearly defined, as you can see here on the top of the left wing. Same story on the top of the right wing. Printed detail is also pretty accurate, which looks really nice as well. Painted detail is good. The only nitpick I can really point out is that I do notice the thickness of the silver paint here on the leading edge slats does tend to vary ever so slightly. Again, very small imperfection and not really worth complaining about. Looks good here on the right side. The underside of the wings features no printed detail, but there really isn't too much to put down there either. The molded and painted detail present down here looks pretty solid though, so good job down here as well. Let's look at the split scimitar wingtips. These look pretty nice. The shape is very nicely done. The edges are clearly defined, which is good to see. Now, I would like to try and point this out. Here, the paint is actually pink to match the rest of the fuselage. It is not blue, so that is a nice touch that NG chose to put there. Paint application on both sides of the scimitar tip looks pretty good as well, so this is the one on the left side. I'll show you the one on the right side in just a moment. There's no weird shapes or bends or anything unusual with these scimitar tips either, so NG did a great job on them. Now if the camera would focus on the tip, there you go. Moving on to the horizontal stabilizers and the rear section of the aircraft, I do see that the joint between the horizontal stabilizers is a little bit wide because I can see the attachment points between the fuselage and the horizontal stabilizers. It's hard to see this from almost any angle, but it is rather noticeable, and I don't really see this often on NG models, so that is kind of weird to see. The horizontal stabilizers themselves look pretty good. They're mounted at an acceptable angle as well. Pretty nice. And the detail on them, even though there isn't any printed detail except for maybe the reflective paint on the top, they still are pretty nice as well. In terms of the rear section of the aircraft, the one thing I did notice earlier while we were looking at the fuselage was some pink paint spidering onto the silver for the APU. That or the silver paint for the APU got cut off. Minor infraction, just something I noticed. Here's the bottom of the rear of the fuselage. This looks pretty solid. The printing for the different lines on the top side of the fuselage, they align, or not align, but they come together down here, and the alignment looks pretty solid. Moving on to the engines look really nice. The exhaust nozzles are painted several different shades of metallic silver. That looks pretty good. They're also pretty sharp, so don't go poking your finger back there. The raked engines look pretty good as well. Printed detail seems okay. I do see a small paint imperfection on one of the rakes right here, or one of the rake tips, if you will. I'm not quite sure what that is, but it's a small imperfection. The fan detail looks really nice. You can see the curved fan blades, which are accurate to the 737 MAX family. Looks pretty good. The undersides of the engines are very nicely detailed. They feature a lot of printed detail. And on the inside of the engines, there is a lot of printed detail as well. Very nice job from NG. I do see that on the right engine, the exhaust nozzle isn't exactly aligned with the center. I do notice a slight tilt between the engine cowling and the exhaust nozzle. Small imperfection, nothing terrible. Let's talk about communication features that this model has. This model features antennae and a singular sat dome. There's a large antenna here at the center of the aircraft. This looks good. It's mounted securely. There's no issues with it. The sat dome is pretty nice. The seam with the fuselage is smooth, and I don't see any. There might be an alignment issue with it, actually. I do see it off to the right. Yep, it is off to the right side of the aircraft. Whether this is accurate or not, I'm not 100% sure. I don't believe it is, but on some aircraft, the sat domes are off to the left or right side of the aircraft. So I do want to point that out. And up here, finishing off the communication equipment on the top, is this small antenna right here. This looks pretty good as well. Now on the bottom side of the aircraft, there is a bit more in terms of antennas. However, there are no sat domes. We have this large antenna on the front underside of the aircraft. I do see a little ball of glue, so they did put too much glue on here. Not too terrible, but hey, at least we know it's going to stay put. And over here we have two more antennas. These look pretty good as well. They're the same large ones like I showed you earlier. These look pretty solid. We're going to move on to the landing gear, but before I do, I'll show you the bottom side of the aircraft. The bottom side of the aircraft is nicely detailed. There's a lot of painted and printed detail going on down here as well, at least on the fuselage. Like I mentioned earlier, the wings don't feature any printed detail. Not that there needs to be, but the bottom side of the fuselage is very detailed. Now, moving on to the landing gear. The landing gear on this model is quite nice. There you go. Let me just try it. And there we go. So it rolls smoothly. They're made out of rubber, the wheels at least. And the gear struts themselves are quite nicely detailed. I do see signs that this landing gear here may have been re-glued at some point. Whether this is factory or not, I'm not quite sure, but I can tell because of the paint missing right here. So this may have been re-glued at some point prior to arriving to me, because this model arrived fully intact for me. And here's the nose gear. The nose gear looks pretty nice. It might be at a slight angle, but nothing terrible. The nose gear doors actually are quite nicely detailed. You can see some of the printing on there, including the ETOPS rating. Looks quite nice. Overall, the gear are pretty decent. Time for my signature steering contest. Wing flex here looks good. Engine clearance looks good. Gear balance might be slightly asymmetrical. Actually, no, it's not. The gear balance is not asymmetrical. Engine clearance isn't asymmetrical either. Cockpit window printing maybe slightly, ever so slightly off to an angle towards the right side of the aircraft, but it's pretty negligible. The horizontal stabilizers, as mentioned earlier, are mounted at an acceptable angle, and the vertical stabilizer looks perfectly straight up. Excellent from here. This concludes my review. It is now time for my opinion and recommendation. I think this model is quite nice. Even though it is fictional, I'm typically not a fan of fantasy models, but NG model did this one quite nicely in my opinion. It's nicely detailed. The quality is not perfect, not that any diecast model will ever be perfect, but there are a few imperfections that I pointed out throughout the video. But overall, I think they're minuscule enough for the model to be definitely acceptable. So therefore, I do recommend this model to other collectors who are interested in purchasing it. It is quite nice, and it's definitely an interesting choice from NG to have made this fictional aircraft, which in my opinion, I think looks kind of cursed, if you will, but it's cool in concept. It's definitely grown on me as time has passed. Well, that concludes my video. Thank you so much for watching. Feel free to check out my channel for more reviews of model airplanes I collect. Be sure to like this video, comment your thoughts and any questions you may have, and subscribe so you never miss a new video from me. Happy building, happy collecting, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.